Hello, everyone. Haku, Maktaka Jess McCool. My name is Jess McCool. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm joining virtually from Shmiwich land, also known as Santa Barbara. Kashoa Paktina, Kakinalan. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. I am a program associate for the Community Resilience Centers program at the California Strategic Growth Council. Thanks for watching the first webinar in our application webinar series on the CRC Round 1 Final Guidelines and Notice of Funding Availability. Next slide, please. So before we get started, if you wish to request webinar materials in an alternative format or need translation and interpretation services, please let us know and we'll follow up to get you those materials and services. You can email our team inbox at crc@sgc.ca.gov, or you can click on the link in the video description below and let us know in our post-webinar survey. Next slide, please. If you find that you have any questions throughout the webinar, you can let us know by contacting us, checking out our website to find the most updated program information. Our team email is crc@sgc.ca.gov. You can also sign up for our CRC email list, which will send you updates, reminders about application materials that we'll be releasing soon, different webinars we'll be releasing, and office hours as well. Next slide, please. So welcome to the first in our Community Resilience Centers application webinar series. This is the first webinar in a series of 4 total. 3 additional webinars will be released in July, so stay tuned for those as they will cover more details specific to each of the 3 grant types. In addition to our webinars, we will also host application office hours, and the full schedule of those office hours will be discussed today at the end of our presentation and will also be available online. Next slide, please. So here's our plan for the webinar today. We will start with some brief legislative history, followed by a summary of engagement during the public comment period, and then a program overview. This overview will focus on the changes that were made in the final guidelines across all the grant types, the application process, upcoming due dates, and forthcoming application materials. Lastly, we'll cover recommended next steps and application timelines and do a quick demo of the updated CRC webpage to close out. Next slide. So here are our objectives for today's webinar: to provide a CRC program background and overview of the CRC Round 1 Final Guidelines and Notice of Funding Availability, to review the application process and components, to offer reminders and updates about upcoming due dates and forthcoming application materials, and to demo our updated CRC program webpage. So I'm going to pause here and let the rest of the team introduce themselves. I'll pass to Dora to kick us off.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dora Monterosa. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a CRC Program Analyst, joining virtually today from Nisan-on-Land, also called Sacramento, California. And I'll pass it.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Jessica Cervantes. I use she, her pronouns, and I am also a CRC Program Associate, joining virtually from Tongva-land, also called East Los Angeles, California, and I'll pass it on to Cora.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Coral Abbott. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a CRC Program Manager, joining virtually from Nisan-on-Land, also called Sacramento, California.
And just wanted to note too, unable to join us today, but is one of the founding members of the CRC team is Lisa Hu, CRC Program Analyst. All right, and I will pass to Coral to present the first section for us.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jess. If we could go to the next slide. So back in summer of 2021, the Community Resilience Centers program was established by Senate Bill 155 to provide funding for the construction or retrofit of facilities to serve as community resilience centers that mitigate the public health impacts of extreme heat and other emergency situations exacerbated by climate change. So think of wildfire, power outages, or flooding. It specified that the program should not only include the physical infrastructure elements that are needed to serve as emergency response facilities during climate or other disasters, but also as spaces for communities to build long-term resilience. The enabling legislation also states that CRCs should be led by multi-stakeholder partnerships and ensure that community-based organizations, or CBOs, and local residents are represented in the governance and decision-making processes for these resilience centers. And then finally, statute calls for SGC to go through a public process for developing the guidelines to allow for transparency and stakeholder feedback. So we'll cover later in our presentation how we did that. And then Assembly Bill 211 passed last year in 2022 gave additional direction to the program to prioritize projects located in and benefiting under-resourced communities, which has a specific definition in state code, which we'll also go over. Also to prioritize projects representing statewide geographic diversity, and to specify the number of years a recipient must offer services and programs at the CRC. And then importantly, it also discusses requirements for SGC to report on the program to the legislature, and also authorizes advance payment for certain applicants. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the final funding breakdown for round one. SGC received $110 million through the general fund in this current budget year to implement the program. This includes funding for grants, staff like ourselves to work on the program, technical assistance to applicants, and evaluation. Of the total funds, $98.6 million will be available for round one grants. You might notice that some of the text on this slide is in the color blue. Throughout the presentation today, this will be to indicate areas that we've made changes to from the draft to the final guidelines. So those of you who have been paying attention since the draft, these are where we've made changes based on feedback we received. So a total of $5 million will be available for CRC planning grants, which now range from $100,000 to $500,000 available for each grant. Planning grants will fund communities in initial stages of CRC project development that need funds for plan development, community engagement, coordination, and other activities that are necessary to prepare for future rounds of CRC and other related funding streams. A total of $9.6 million will be available for CRC project development grants, which are new, as you can see from the slide, from the draft to the final version. So we added this grant type to bridge the gap between planning and implementation grants. These grant awards range from $500,000 to $5 million each. Project development grants will fund pre-development and basic infrastructure activities that advance community serving facilities' ability to serve as a future community resilience center, and prepare grantees for CRC rounds 2 and 3 or any future rounds, and other related funding opportunities similar to the planning grants. And then the bulk of the funding, a total of $84 million, will be available for CRC implementation grants, each ranging from $1 million to $10 million. Implementation grants will fund new construction or upgrades or retrofits of facilities to serve as community resilience centers, and will also pay for services and programs that build overall community resilience. And then a final note that SGC has the discretion to make partial awards and to reallocate funds between grant types. So for example, if a project that applied for implementation doesn't meet all the eligibility requirements for an implementation grant, but would be a good candidate for a project development grant, we may offer them a project development award instead. Next slide, please. So with the official program launch in July of last year, staff committed to a robust stakeholder engagement process to develop the round one draft guidelines as called for by legislation. So early on, we hosted a kickoff webinar and 5 listening sessions. That included 2 general focused, 1 rural focused, and 2 tribal focused listening sessions. Across all of the sessions in the kickoff webinar, we engaged over 500 folks. And through the process, we received over 1,000 comments from partners and collaborators on the ground. During this initial period, we also met with folks on the ground interested in the program, presented on the program at forums, and conducted key informant interviews to research rural communities' resilience needs. All of that input we received in this time period is what we used to develop our initial draft that we released in December. Next slide, please. So from all that input, we developed and released our round one draft guidelines in December 2022, like I mentioned. We held about a 45-day public comment window. In that window, our team held 7 workshops to get feedback from communities and organizations that were invested in the program design or wanted to apply themselves. Through that process, we received over 750 comments. Then our team went through a process of sorting through all the input that we received, identifying research topics, and then launched into organizing a series of focus groups and discussions to dig deeper into these topics. That led to over 30 conversations with interagency partners, external organizations, and individuals that represent specific topics in the guidelines, including access for individuals with disabilities, broadband access, building and facility maintenance, emergency management and communications, and energy resilience, to name some of them. And we just wanted to thank everybody who participated in this process and took the time to provide your input and feedback. We know your time is really valuable, and we appreciate that you took the time to share your input with us. It really, truly did lead to the development of the program, and we couldn't have created it without all of you. So thank you again. And with that, I will hand it over to Dora to start the program overview.
Thanks, Coral. So I'll go ahead and dive a little bit into our overview of the entire program, and then we'll be able to zoom in on each of the 3 grant types. Next slide, please. Our overall approach is pulled from a combination of requirements from statute, priorities we heard during initial listening sessions, stakeholder interviews and meetings, advice from those with experience developing resilient centers or hubs, and now, of course, the feedback that we heard during the public comment period. So here is our quick overview. We will the CRC program will build climate resilience and community resilience. We'll prioritize community serving locations. We'll require community engagement and collaborative stakeholder structure. This is really building upon the lessons learned from SGC's transformative climate communities and regional climate collaboratives programs. So the CRC program will require collaborative stakeholder structure, forming local diverse multi-stakeholder partnerships to foster long-term investments in the community's vision for transformation. The CRCs will balance shorter-term and longer-term needs, both during emergencies and year-round programming to build community resilience. We'll prioritize the most vulnerable priority populations. And lastly, we'll fund a mix of projects: climate impact, facility types, lead applicants, and geographic diversity spanning rural and urban communities, as well as incorporated and unincorporated communities. Next slide, please. The CRC model is intentionally flexible to account for the vast spectrum of communities across California. The core components, however, do include the following: multi-stakeholder partnerships, which per statute must include local residents and community-based organizations in the governance and decision-making processes; robust, meaningful, and culturally appropriate community engagement throughout all phases. This includes design, application, implementation, and evaluation; capital projects, referring to the physical infrastructure investments of the CRC facility itself and CRC campus amenities like bus stop or community garden; the community resilience services and programs, referring to the social infrastructure investments and services and programs to ensure ongoing year-round usage of the CRC while strengthening of the local community resilience. Equipped with these core components, community resilience centers will empower communities, respond to climate emergencies, and provide year-round services and programs to enhance both climate resilience and community resilience. Next slide, please. So all communities are eligible to apply for the CRC program. We are directed per statute to prioritize projects located in and benefiting under-resourced communities, which is a set definition in the state code. For anyone who is familiar with SGC's Regional Collaboratives program, this is the same definition from that program. The map pictured here on the right highlights all under-resourced communities in blue. We'll include this in forthcoming materials on our webpage. We also have added language to make very clear that tribal lands, unincorporated communities, and rural communities that meet the definition of under-resourced communities qualify as priority communities for the CRC program. All applicants must discuss if and how their proposal considers, involves, impacts, and benefits priority communities. We strongly encourage applicants from priority communities to apply for technical assistance. We will have instructions on how applicants for each grant type can apply for technical assistance later in the presentation. Next slide, please. So in alignment with California's Governor's Office of Emergency Services, also known as Cal-OES, and other state agencies, the CRC has identified the following priority populations: individuals with physical, developmental, or intellectual disabilities, individuals with chronic conditions or injuries, individuals with limited English proficiency, older adults, children, and pregnant people, low income, homeless, and or transportation disadvantaged or public transit dependent people. Each CRC proposal must identify, work with, and intentionally serve the needs of priority populations in the proposed neighborhood containing the CRC facility. Next slide, please. Thanks. We have two types of funding targets. To meet the statewide geographic diversity required by statute, the program commits to awarding at least one CRC grants of any of the grant types to each of the Cal OES Fire and Rescue Mutual Aid regions. Here is a map of those 6 regions to the left. We also have a tribal funding target. We intend to fund a minimum of 5 qualifying tribally led CRC projects in round 1 across all grant types. I will now pass this on to Jessica to talk about planning grants.
Thank you, Dora. As mentioned, I will now be covering planning grants, the first out of the 3 CRC grant types. CRC planning grants are for if you seek funding to conduct a community needs assessment and or design a community engagement plan, identify and prepare potential project sites, build capacity with staff, partners, and or the shared governance structure, complete a fiscal analysis for development, construction, and maintenance costs, and update local planning policies, codes, and jurisdictional plans. CRC planning grants are a great fit for applicants exploring ideas and potential for local resilience centers. Planning grants fund planning activities to prepare communities for future funding opportunities and programs that align with the CRC program objectives, with a specific focus on preparation for CRC rounds 2 and 3 of implementation grants. CRC planning grant activities, therefore, should focus on developing a proposal for a future CRC implementation grant or similar funding opportunity, and must demonstrate effective, robust local community engagement and planning efforts. Planning grants awards range from $100,000 to $500,000 each. And then here are the program objectives to the planning grants. They must advance the local community's ability to identify, vision, design, construct, resource, and activate sites as a community resilience centers, ensure or increase accessibility of CRCs to community members, especially during emergencies, nest, build, strengthen, and sustain local community resilience in connection with a proposed CRC, and demonstrate consistency with the state's planning priorities contained in section 65041.1 of the Government Code. These priorities intend to promote equity, strengthen the economy, protect the environment, and promote public health and safety in the state, including urban, suburban, and rural communities. Now I will go over the eligibility for this grant opportunity. There is broad eligibility for applicants and facility types for the planning grants. A collaborative stakeholder structure is required by end of grant term, resulting in a signed partnership agreement and or MOU. Applicants should propose initial partners in the planning grant application. If possible, the technical assistance providers will work with grant recipients to build a collaborative stakeholder structure where appropriate. Applicants must have a planning area and site identified within that planning area. Applicants will be required to demonstrate site control or an ability to gain site control for all proposed project sites within the grant term if funding is awarded. We are taking a more broad approach with the planning grants and are providing buckets of eligible activities, including but not limited to preparing applicants for a CRC implementation grant, identifying and preparing project sites, completing fiscal analyses and studies, building capacity, evaluating, updating, and streamlining policies and codes, preparing or updating local jurisdictional plans, and designing community engagement plan and or strategies. CRC grant funds may not be used for costs associated with construction or ground disturbance activities for CRC planning grants. And I will go a little bit into the application process and grant administration. Within this first phase, we are offering an optional TA request form. One eligible entity will complete the form on behalf of their applicant team. The goal here is to get initial concept and ideas, types of technical assistance needs, so we can review and match. Again, this is optional and folks can apply without this step. Then there is the full application process, including narrative, work plan, community engagement plan, budget, and documentation on applicants' capacity. The threshold review is much simpler and focuses primarily on eligibility. You can see a full list of full application components for planning grants in the CRC Round 1 Final Guidelines, Section 9.2 Application Components on page 50 of the guidelines. CRC planning grants will have a grant term of 2 years with an option to extend on a case-by-case basis. And the full applications will be following the following planning grant scoring criteria. Planning grant proposals will be scored out of a total of 100 points according to the following criteria, which includes the CRC vision and objectives for 15 points, the community profile and engagement plan for 25 points. Guidelines will detail additional points available for specific partnerships with tribes, organizations that represent priority populations, and organizations that have expertise on civic and community development, along with grassroots engagement and climate resilience. Following that is the lead applicant capacity for 15 points and project impact for 40 points, which includes additional points to proposals with projects located in benefiting under-resourced communities, additional points to proposals from any of the following priority communities that meet the definition of under-resourced community, which includes unincorporated communities and rural communities, and additional points to proposals demonstrating ability to directly meet readiness requirements to apply for a CRC Round 2 implementation grants. And followed by that is the sharing plan for 5 points. And with that, I'm happy to hand off to Jess to cover the project development grants.
Thank you, Jessica. We can move on to the next slide. I'll be covering the CRC project development grants. All right, next slide. Thank you so much. If you seek funding to engage in pre-development activities like site assessments and analyses, design plans, surveys, permitting, and acquisitions, or if you seek to develop and construct critical utility infrastructure at potential project sites, including water, energy, broadband, and more, if you'd like to develop plans for future CRC sites or sustain capacity of project partners through financial, legal, partnership, and operational activities, then these grants are the perfect fit for you. These grants are great for applicants with an identified site requiring basic infrastructure and pre-development investment. Grants range from $500,000 to $5 million each for project development grants. These will prioritize retrofit projects from tribal, rural, and disadvantaged unincorporated communities. Next slide, please. So here are the program objectives for project development grants: to advance the development of sites identified by local residents for use as community resilience centers that build climate resilience and community resilience both during emergencies and year-round; to construct climate resilient infrastructure to ensure or improve access of CRCs to community members, and to strengthen local community resilience in connection with the proposed CRC. And lastly, to demonstrate consistency with the state's planning priorities contained in section 65041.1 of the government code. And like Jessica mentioned, these priorities intend to promote equity, strengthen the economy, protect the environment, and promote public health and safety in the state, including urban, suburban, and rural communities. Next slide, please. So again, there's broad eligibility for applicants and facility types for project development grants. The lead applicant and all co-applicants must form a collaborative stakeholder structure that involves multi-stakeholder partnerships and includes local residents and community nominated members, such as community-based organizations or CBOs. At least one existing facility for retrofits is required at the time of application. Eligible project development activities include general pre-development phase activities, including community engagement, feasibility studies, market analysis, environmental assessments, surveys and remediation, etc. Pre-development, construction, and development of long-term operation and maintenance plans for critical utility infrastructure and basic infrastructure pre-development, construction, and planning. Local project planning activities that prepare community prioritized projects for development and future activation as CRCs. And support costs to build and sustain local capacity of project leads and partners. Next slide. There are some ineligible costs, so we are unable to use CRC funds to pay for fossil fuel powered appliances and infrastructure like diesel generators or gas powered appliances. You cannot use CRC funds to supplant other committed funds for any part of the proposal. While many engagement-related costs like food, childcare, and transportation costs are eligible, we cannot pay for the following outreach costs: direct cash benefits, subsidies, or participant incentives. And we also cannot pay for projects without long-term operations or maintenance plans. You can find a full list of ineligible costs in the CRC Round 1 Final Guidelines, Section 7.1, Eligible and Ineligible costs on page 35. All right, next slide, please. So similar to the planning grants, we are offering an optional TA request form. One eligible entity will complete the form on behalf of their collaborative stakeholder structure. The goal here is to get initial concept and ideas, types of TA needs, so we can review and match. Again, this is optional and folks can apply without this step. The full application process includes the narrative work plan, community engagement plan, draft partnership agreement and/or memorandum of understanding, budget, and documentation on site readiness and applicants' capacity. You can see a full list of application components for the project development grants in the CRC Round 1 Final Guidelines, Section 9.2, Application Components on page 51. Application TA will be available, and CRC project development grants will have a grant term of 2 years with an option to extend on a case-by-case basis. Next slide, please. So here are the program thresholds for the project development grants. Applicants must demonstrate how community residents and community-based organizations informed project proposals and selected the project area, as well as how they will remain engaged throughout the project design, application, implementation, and evaluation phases. Applicants must submit a draft partnership agreement and/or memorandum of understanding with all parties relevant for the proposed CRC project development grant. Site readiness, these requirements ensure that proposed basic infrastructure components can be constructed within the grant term. This includes demonstrated site control prior to implementation, identification of all permits required to implement all proposed components of the application, and if the lead applicant is a public agency, they must provide evidence of a past formal resolution in the CRC proposal and a submitted operations and maintenance plan, which must detail indebtedness for all properties included in the CRC application. Applicant capacity includes management capacity and financial capacity. And then lastly, the long-term use of the CRC facility. So grantees whose projects include infrastructure components must provide a legally binding document by the end of the grant term that demonstrates the facility's dedicated use as a community serving facility for a minimum of 15 years after project implementation is complete. And again, you can review all of these program thresholds in the final guidelines. Thank you. The CRC project development grant proposals will be scored out of a total of 100 points according to the following criteria. Further detail on scoring criteria is also in the CRC project development grant application materials, which we'll be covering later in the presentation. So vision and objectives with 5 points, community profile engagement plan for 10 points. This is the clear description of the community engagement to date, and the proposed plan under the grant term. This should especially focus on the outreach, engagement, and improved outcomes for priority communities and priority populations. Next is the capacity, 15 points, to ensure that the lead applicant has financial and organizational capacity to manage the grant. The project impact with 35 points. This is the demonstrated need or value of proposed strategies and activities, including the demonstration of building climate resilience and community resilience through anticipated project benefits and outcomes. This must include local climate risks, exposures, and adaptation and resilience measures, both current and historic, and how proposed activities will build local community resilience or local climate resilience, and evidence of how proposed activities will meet those program objectives. Next, the project design and feasibility at 30 points. The overall project design and feasibility are clear, relevant, and appropriate given the project vision statement, program objectives, specific site, and specific local community. This also is demonstrating ability to meet all site readiness requirements and CRC project requirements by the program deadlines, must also have a clear and appropriate timeline and budget, as well as demonstration of financial sustainability of the CRC, including the operations and maintenance costs and services and programs. This also includes demonstrated ability to directly meet the readiness requirements to apply for CRC rounds 2 and 3 of the implementation grants. And additionally, there will be additional points to proposals located in and benefiting priority communities, disadvantaged unincorporated communities, tribal communities, and/or rural communities. And then lastly, the sharing plan, 5 points, just the how you are able to replicate and use the other communities with clear, effective plan for sharing. And that is all for project development grants. I will now pass to Coral to cover the first section for implementation grants.
Thanks so much, Jess. So Dora and I will cover the last CRC grant type, implementation grants. Next slide, please. So if you seek funding to construct, retrofit, and/or upgrade a proposed CRC facility, or to construct, improve, and/or develop campus amenities near a proposed facility, or to purchase materials, administer, and fund staffing for services and programs based at a proposed facility, then you should apply to a CRC implementation grant. These grants are a great fit for applicants who already have an identified project site, who have local partners, and a plan to build climate and community resilience in place, or one that you can get to by the time of application. Grants will range from $1 to $10 million each for activities including pre-development, community engagement, construction, services and programs, and also some funds for evaluation. Next slide, please. So there are 5 program objectives for CRC implementation grants. The first is to offer multi-benefit physical community serving spaces that are resilient to current and future climate hazards. To provide integrated delivery of essential services and programming to support local communities, both during disasters, emergencies, and disruption events, and to address ongoing community needs and build community cohesion. Integrate physical infrastructure projects with social infrastructure through community-driven partnerships and programming to increase climate resilience, expand economic opportunities, and reduce health, environmental, and social inequities across California. Next is to leverage and build a skilled, diversified, and trained workforce, and to promote local workforce development and training opportunities. And then finally, to build, strengthen, and sustain local leadership and grassroots engagement in civic and community development and climate resilience awareness and activities. So you can see from this that it's not purely focused on climate change and risk. It's certainly an important part, but focusing a lot on broader community resilience as well. Next slide, please. So we're keeping eligible applicants and eligible facility types very expansive. The goal is to be less prescriptive and more flexible, to acknowledge the different needs in different communities so you can pick the facilities that work best for you. Applicants as well, there's a list, but it's very expansive in terms of who can apply. For the project area, we require that capital projects, which are the facility itself, as well as any campus amenities like a community garden or a bus stop, something of that nature, has to be on the same parcel or adjoining parcel as the Resilience Center, or within a 1 mile radius of the Resilience Center, and needs to be accessible to pedestrians and individuals using wheelchairs or other mobility devices, or accessible by vehicle by the end of the grant term. And then in response to public comment that we received on the draft, we are allowing proposals that include multiple CRC facilities. To qualify for this option, the facilities have to have the same owner, and the application has to demonstrate how the application team is coordinating across sites, but serving distinct communities within their region. That might look like, for example, 2 separate libraries within a county that are applying under one application, but each library serves a distinct community in that county. The sites can also have different programs and services from each other, and like all projects, should show how engagement of those distinct communities informed the services, programs, and features at each individual site. Finally, transportation to and from the CRC can extend beyond the identified project area. So if your application includes, for example, a van to transport youth to and from the CRC for after-school programming, it is absolutely fine if that van goes beyond the 1 mile radius to pick up and drop off youth as a part of that programming. Next slide, please. So the guidelines include 7 strategies that applicants can pick from to demonstrate how they're building resilience. We require applicants to select at least 4 for their proposal. The guidelines propose example activities under each strategy to demonstrate how each one encompasses both physical and social infrastructure activities. And so by that, we mean both capital projects, whether that's the facility itself or campus amenities, as well as services and programs that meet that strategy. So the first is energy resilience, building or enhancing the CRC's capacity to prepare for and withstand energy-related disruptions, improve overall energy efficiency, and provide energy access and resources to the local community during emergency activations and year-round. The second is water resilience, very similar idea, helping communities to withstand water-related disruptions, improve overall water efficiency, and provide water access to the community during emergencies and year-round. Third is air quality and public health. There's going to be a similar theme to provide clean air during emergency activations and year-round, and then also to equip communities with resources, information, and trainings on public health and extreme weather conditions, including extreme heat, and support social cohesion and community resilience. Fourth is nature-based solutions and food security, providing food during emergencies as well as year-round, developing or strengthening nature-based solutions to mitigate climate impacts, and providing resources, information, and trainings for community members on nature-based solutions and healthy foods. Fifth is emergency preparedness and critical communication. So building or enhancing the CRC's capacity to prepare for and withstand emergency activations, develop and strengthen local critical communications infrastructure and networks, and provide the local community with resources, information, and trainings for emergencies and critical communications. Sixth is mobility and access, building or enhancing the CRC's capacity to serve community members, particularly focusing in on those priority populations that were covered earlier, and making sure that they're able to do that effectively and adequately during emergency activations and year-round. And developing or strengthening accessible transportation options to the CRC facility and enhance mobility options for communities. Finally, workforce development, education, and training, building or enhancing the CRC's capacity to provide local workforce development trainings, developing and providing workforce opportunities and support relevant to local community members' strengths, priorities, and needs, and equipping communities with increased access to leadership and advocacy, civic engagement, jobs and careers, and other economic opportunities. And then again, you have to select at least 4 of those is the important takeaway. Perfect. So eligible activities break down into 2 broad categories. The first is capital projects, which include the CRC facility itself, as well as amenities located on the campus. The community resilience, well, maybe to dive into that a little bit more, the facility itself includes any changes, retrofits, construction to the building, and then campus amenities can be somewhat broad-ranging. Encourage folks to take a look at eligible activities section of the guidelines to understand what the options are for campus amenities. Then community resilience services and programs, which includes a wide range of activities that can help to build community resilience. These categories are broadly sorted into health and well-being, emergency preparedness and response, access and mobility, information distribution, housing affordability and protection, and workforce development. We do want to be able to be flexible to meet communities' visions as long as it falls within the program framework and program objectives. So there's a lot of room within what is eligible. We included a list of examples in Appendix D of our guidelines that we really suggest you take a look at to get a sense of some of the ideas. It's not an exhaustive list. Next slide, please. So we split eligible costs into broad categories with minimums and maximums set to ensure the majority of funds go towards building out physical projects, because that's kind of the direction we were given from legislation that created the program. So first is direct implementation. This is costs directly related to implementing the project. It again is broken up into, well, it's broken up into 2 components. The capital projects, which is the facility and campus amenity, and then the community resilience services and programs. So the capital projects, the construction piece, including the facility and campus amenities, has to be at least 51% of the award. So the majority of the award has to go towards capital projects. And a note that this includes costs related to construction as well as pre-development and basic infrastructure costs. Community resilience services and programs, again, is costs related to rolling out services and programs. So some common costs here might be staff time to run programs, or cost of materials and any supplies that are needed. Community engagement is costs related to engaging community in development and implementation of the overall project. Then there's indirect costs. This is capped at 12% for applicants, so you can't spend more than 12% unless you are a federally recognized tribe that has an indirect cost rate that you've already negotiated with the federal government. You may use that for this grant. And then finally, data collection and indicator tracking, when we want to make sure folks set aside at least 3% of your budget to dedicate towards data collection and indicator tracking. As mentioned earlier, there's a long list of example eligible activities in Appendix D of the Round 1 Final Guidelines if you want to get a sense of what might fall into these different categories as far as eligible costs. Next slide, please. So there are some ineligible costs. We're not able to use CRC funds to pay for fossil fuel powered appliances and infrastructure like diesel generators or gas powered appliances. You can't use CRC funds to supplant other committed funds for any part of the proposal, including services and programs. And then while many engagement related costs like food, childcare, and transportation are eligible, we can't pay for a few specific outreach costs, direct cash benefits, subsidies, and participant incentives. And then we also can't pay for projects without long-term operations and maintenance plans. You can find a full list of ineligible costs in the CRC Round 1 Final Guidelines, Section 7.1, Ineligible and Eligible Costs, that's on page 35. And with that, I will hand off to Dora to present on the last slide in the implementation grant section.
Thank you, Coral. So this is actually one of the sections that has changed the most from draft to final guidelines. So those who were familiar with draft guidelines should definitely pay close attention to this part of the webinar, as there have been some significant changes that we'll go over. Next slide, please. So in terms of facility requirements, all CRC projects must involve a physical building. The CRC program cannot fund upgrades only to an outdoor space, although improvements to an outdoor space may be eligible in combination with the physical CRC facility. So for example, a local park with an attached community center would definitely qualify here. By the end of the CRC Implementation Grant award term, all CRC facilities must meet the required functions and features below that we'll go through briefly next. And additionally, projects located in rural communities for whom these requirements might present a hardship may request modifications with justification for any of the asterisk functions or features that we'll go over in these slides. These are also detailed, of course, in the guidelines as well. And specifically in section 5.4, implementation project requirements, pages 22 through 24. In these cases, applicants must name the asterisk function or feature, provide context for the specific hardship, propose a relevant and feasible modification, and submit requests to staff. Staff will review these requests on a case-by-case basis. So a good example of this might be a broadband connectivity in rural communities. We definitely heard a lot in public feedback around that potentially being a hardship. So, and that can depend on external factors beyond the scope of an applicant's control. A relevant and feasible modification to the broadband requirement could include high-speed internet access in the CRC facility by the end of grant term, in addition to purchase and or maintenance of hotspots, satellite and ham radios, phone trees, or provision of computer access and digital literacy trainings and resources at the CRC facility. Next slide, please. So in terms of the CRC facility requirements, these have been absolutely edited to reflect the public comments, so you can see quite a few in blue here. Our guidelines propose that all CRC facilities must be able to serve the following required functions by the end of the CRC Implementation Grant award term. So these are not required at time of application, of course. So they must be open and accessible to the public and offer community resilient services and programs year-round to residents. They must be able to be activated 7 days per week for heat wave and other climate emergencies that do not require overnight sheltering. For larger scale disasters that do require overnight shelter, the CRC facility either must be able to be activated for overnight shelter 24/7, or they can coordinate transport of community members to an identified nearby shelter. Next slide, please. CRCs that will provide overnight shelter during disasters must meet the following functions at the site itself or through partnerships. So these include space and supplies needed for people to sleep, pet sheltering, food distribution or space for food preparation and storage, showers and ADA compliant showers, refrigeration for medicines, laundry, portable restrooms in the event of water disruptions. Next slide, please. The guidelines also propose requiring CRCs to have the following features by the completion of the project. Required features by the completion of the project include ADA compliant facilities, which you can see the ADA checklist for emergency shelters linked in the guidelines, gender neutral restrooms, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems or HVAC systems, air filtration system with MERV 13 at minimum, broadband access, backup power generation and or battery storage, device charging capabilities for cell phones, personal communication devices, medical devices, power wheelchairs, and other assistive devices and technology, and drinking water stored on site with a plan for resupply. We're also encouraging people to consider optional features that encourage social cohesion and disaster preparedness, such as conference rooms, childcare spaces, computer labs, medical facilities and resources, and outdoor spaces. Next slide, please. Our services and usage for the Community Resilience Center program has definitely changed a lot due to public feedback as well. The final guidelines now require the CRCs to be used as a CRC for a minimum of 15 years following the completion of the funded project, and grantees must offer services and programs through the end of the grant term. Next slide, please. Next, we'll go over required plans. Upon submission of full application materials, only draft plans are required for each of the following. Grantees will be able to update and complete these plans during the award term. For emergency plans, this includes mobility plans, emergency communications, energy resilience plans, plans to work with relevant emergency responders and direct services organizations, agreements in place to support activation, and of course must follow existing emergency procedures and plans. All plans should consider and integrate into the plan how they will serve priority populations. The year-round Community Resilience Center plan, the Community Resilience Plan, is to ensure year-round usage of the facility. Next slide, please. So the next two slides on program thresholds and scoring, we'll briefly overview here. More detailed information can absolutely be found in the final guidelines, but can also be found in our subsequent application webinar and implementation grants coming out in July. So listed here are 5 components of CRC program thresholds. Applicants must demonstrate how community residents and community-based organizations informed project proposals and selected the project area, as well as how they will remain engaged through project design, application, implementation, and evaluation phases. That's the community engagement plan. For partnership agreements and MOUs, applicants must submit draft partnership agreements and or memorandums of understanding with all parties relevant for the proposed CRC implementation grant. These can be unsigned or unexecuted and in draft form by the time of application. For site readiness, these requirements ensure that proposed basic infrastructure components can be constructed within the grant term. This includes the California Environmental Quality Act or CEQA documentation, site control permits, financial feasibility, project schedules, facility condition assessments, construction cost estimates, facility floor plans, and operation and maintenance plans. Projects will be carefully vetted during the application review to ensure that readiness status is accurately reflected in application materials and that additional documents may be requested of applicants in advance of the awards. If the lead applicant is a public agency, they must provide evidence of a past formal resolution in the CRC proposal. Please ensure to review the final guidelines for timing on each of the site readiness components. Some are due at time of application, others are due during specific time intervals throughout the grant term. So you can find more information on those on pages 42 through 45 of our final guidelines. Next is applicant capacity. This includes management capacity and financial capacity of the lead applicant. And lastly, long-term use of CRC facility. Applicants must provide a legally binding document by the end of the second year of the grant term that demonstrates that the facility will remain dedicated to use as a community resilience center for a minimum of 15 years after project implementation is complete. Applicants must either provide a recorded deed restriction or a memorandum of unrecorded grant agreement, or a MOUGA. Next slide, please. Okay, so in this section, we'll review implementation grant scoring criteria. Scores will be 200 points total. The first portion on vision and objectives is worth 20 points. The next section, community profile and engagement plan, is 40 points and will include clear descriptions of community engagement to date and proposed plan under the grant term, and should especially focus on outreach, engagement, and improved outcomes for priority communities and priority populations. Capacity and partnerships are worth 40 points. The section is important in ensuring lead applicant has financial and organizational capacity to manage the grant and evidence of strong, effective multi-stakeholder partnerships secured in the collaborative stakeholder structure through draft partnership agreements and or MOUs. Every CRC implementation grant requires a community's collaborative stakeholder structure and must include representation of CBOs, of community-based organizations, and local residents in governance and decision-making. The guidelines detail additional points for specific partnerships with tribes, organizations that represent priority populations, and organizations that have expertise on civic and community development, grassroots engagement, and climate resilience. The next section on project impact is 65 points. There should be demonstrated need or value of proposed strategies and activities. Here, including demonstration of building climate resilience and community resilience through anticipated project benefits and outcomes. This must include local climate risks, exposures, and adaptation and resilience measures, both current and historic, and how proposed activities will build local climate resilience. Evidence of how proposed activities will meet program objectives. Guidelines also detail additional points to proposals located in and benefiting priority communities, disadvantaged unincorporated communities, and or rural communities. Guidelines will also detail additional point awards for specific workforce development measures. You can find further details, of course, in the specific pages on the guidelines. Project feasibility is next. Those are worth 30 points. Overall, project design and feasibility should be clear, relevant, and appropriate, given the project vision statement, program objectives, specific site, and specific local community. Demonstrated ability to meet all site readiness requirements and CRC project requirements by program deadlines, clear and appropriate timeline and budget, and should also include demonstration of financial sustainability of the CRC itself, including operations and maintenance costs and services and programs. Lastly, 5 points are awarded for a sharing plan. Replicability and usefulness for other communities with clear, effective plan for sharing is what we're looking for here. So next, I will hand this off to Jessica to review our application process.
Thank you, Dora. As mentioned, I'll be reviewing the application process for the implementation grants. The CRC implementation grants will employ a two-phase application process, including a pre-proposal and a full application phase. The intent of the two-phase application process is to decrease the application burden on applicants, offer input and guidance earlier in the application process, and to ensure applicants with limited capacity can request application technical assistance, or also known as TA. The pre-proposal phase includes a pre-proposal form that will clarify for applicants the complexity, timing, support, and expectations of the CRC program. One eligible entity will submit a CRC implementation pre-proposal form describing the proposed CRC implementation project on behalf of their collaborative stakeholder structure. CRC staff will screen pre-proposals and provide feedback and direction, but no scores. And in order to qualify for application TA, implementation grant applicants must submit a pre-proposal. The full application phase includes one entity submitting all application materials on behalf of the collaborative stakeholder structure, and staff screen for program thresholds, which will then advance to proposals for a full evaluation. And more details on the full application components are listed on page 52 in the CRC Round 1 Final Guidelines, section 9.2 of the application components. This full application has an expected release of early July, which will go into our timeline in a little bit. For the next portion, we're going to go more deeply into the CRC implementation pre-proposal and what it entails and its due date. Each CRC implementation grant applicant must submit a pre-proposal form on Microsoft Forms by Friday, June 16th at 11:59 p.m. The link to this form is listed on this slide and can also be found on the CRC website resources page in Round 1 application materials and also the TA request. Time to complete this form will vary, but staff recommend planning to spend at least 6 to 8 hours to complete this pre-proposal to the best of their current knowledge. CRC staff will review pre-proposals to provide consistent, unscored feedback to applicants preparing their full application, match applicants with application technical assistance, and ensure applicants understand deadlines and requirements for implementation grants. Applicants are not beholden to any project details submitted in the implementation pre-proposal for their full application. Pre-proposal responses will not be scored as mentioned earlier, and responses will not impact full applications. The implementation pre-proposal includes 3 sections: the CRC project proposal, thresholds checklist, and application TA requests, along with a final section for additional questions or comments. In the next couple of slides, I will be providing an overview of each section included in the pre-proposal. The first section of the implementation pre-proposal is the CRC project proposal and replaces the concept paper listed in the guidelines as being included in the pre-proposal. This section is the longest section, which includes free response questions and multiple choice questions, and anticipate taking the majority of the 6 to 8 hours suggested to complete this pre-proposal. In this section, applicants will be asked to provide an overview of lead and co-applicants, project location, community served, and project description, among other project-specific questions. Our recommendations is drafting responses outside of the Microsoft form before submitting, as you cannot save progress or edit responses when submitted via Microsoft Forms. You may email our CRC staff at the crc@sgc.ca.gov email to request all pre-proposal questions in a Word document that you may be able to draft your responses in. Please be mindful of the word count maximums listed in the questions, and please share the extent of your current proposal to help SGC team provide feedback before moving on to the full application phase. For the next section, it serves as the thresholds, program thresholds, and it includes multiple choice questions and an overview of the thresholds requirements due by application, grant agreement, and during grant term. Please expect this section to take 10 to 15 minutes. In this section, applicants must review and confirm ability to meet these program thresholds by the stated deadline, which is not by the time of pre-proposal submittal. Our recommendations are to review each threshold in detail, which includes reviewing CRC Round 1 final guidelines for the full detail. In the pre-proposal, each threshold includes a section where you can, and a page number where you can read more about that specific threshold. And we also ask applicants to share any questions or comments regarding the program thresholds at the end of this section. For the third section, it includes the application technical assistance requests, which includes a TA survey that is optional but required to be considered for application technical assistance. Please note that the TA resources are limited and will be awarded on a competitive basis using the information provided in the pre-proposal. SGC staff will prioritize applicants from priority communities for application TA. Please expect this section to take about 15 to 20 minutes, and we recommend that if you're unsure whether you are a good candidate for TA, to please submit your responses to this section. And also, once again, be mindful of word counts, as this section includes both free response and multiple choice questions. From this, as a quick reminder, this implementation pre-proposal is only for implementation grants. It does have a due date of Friday, June 16 by 11:59 p.m. But from that, we'll be moving on to the grant administration for implementation grants. So this grant admin section provides some information on what to expect once a grant is provided. We anticipate having 4-year project completion periods followed by a 1-year performance period. This expedited timeline is because of the funding comes with a requirement for funds to be expended within this timeframe. SGC will enter into a contractual agreement with the lead applicant of each awarded proposal. They will need to work with sub-grantees to pay them for their work on the grant. As mentioned earlier, AB 211 gave SGC advanced pay authority. The legislation did limit the entities who can receive advanced pay to community-based private nonprofit organizations, and additionally detailed that we may only provide advanced pay up to 25% of the award. Our ability to provide advanced pay will also end on June 30th of 2025. Again, these are all set in place by the legislature, and we have no ability to change this guidance. And finally, applicants will need to provide progress reports to SGC, as well as work with the third-party evaluator to collect and report out data on project progress. As mentioned earlier, we're asking grantees to set aside a small percentage of funds to allow for data collection and indicator tracking for the grant. And with that, I will be handing it over to Dora, who will be discussing next steps.
Great, thank you, Jessica. Next slide, please. So in terms of our upcoming application webinars, we will have 3 additional pre-recorded webinars that will be released in July. One for planning grants, one for project development grants, and one for implementation grants. These are to aid prospective applicants during the upcoming application period. Each video will have a brief overview, and then we'll dive further into that particular application's process and components and include a full application materials walkthrough. It will also further discuss scoring criteria with more detail, and we'll screen share walkthrough of the application itself. Each video will also share opportunities to meet potential co-applicants and submit questions to the CRC team. The rest of the videos in the application webinar series will be posted to the SGC YouTube channel in the CRC Round 1 Application Webinar Series playlist after all application materials have been released in July. You can also find them on the CRC webpage when they are posted. Next slide, please. During the upcoming application window, our team will host 10 virtual office hours support to applicants during the application window. Please note that there are a total of 4 audience-specific workshops in the series intended for applicants from rural and tribal communities. Please be mindful of this while registering to attend an office hour session. Please also note that the last 2 office hour sessions, which are bolded there, are each extended to 2 hours in length. Prior registration is highly encouraged. At the time of your registration for office hours, you will be able to submit questions to be answered during the Q&A portion. And additionally, you can also indicate any translation or interpretation requests during the registration. You can find this full schedule and registration information on the CRC webpage under the resources page, which we will show you in a short moment. Next slide, please. So in terms of our application resources and materials, these are our current resources, application components, and optional surveys that are available for our program thus far. In a few minutes, we will cover in a walkthrough where you can find all this information on our updated website, but we wanted to review these here with you to easily describe what is required, what is optional, and the purpose of each of the resources currently available. So in terms of the first 2, the Round 1 final guidelines, of course, has further details that we've described here today and referenced several times. We highly recommend looking there for further information. The CRC Grant Type Guide is to help applicants select the best grant between planning, project development, and implementation that might be best fit for their program or their proposal. For application components, the implementation pre-proposal, as Jessica mentioned, is required and is due on the 16th of June. Application TA request form is optional. This is due also on the 16th of June. This is specific for the planning and project development grants, as implementation grants applicants will only need to fill in the pre-proposal, as the TA request questions are already incorporated there. And then our full implementation, project development, and planning grant applications will be coming soon in July. Lastly, these are our optional surveys to help the CRC team with outreach and engagement. The intent to apply survey, which was released last month, this will be open through the summer. It is optional, but definitely helpful for our team. And today we will also have a post-webinar survey available after this webinar. So that is also optional, but helpful again for our team. Next slide, please. Thank you. The CRC Program Timeline As you can see, it's just another way to represent some of our upcoming deadlines. We have our pre-proposal form and for implementation and our application TA request forms due on the 16th. In early July, full application materials will be released and the applications will be open for those to apply. Through July and August, we will have 3 additional pre-recorded full application webinars released, and the CRC team will host virtual office hours. And all applications will be due September 5th for all of the CRC grant types. Then in December of 2023, SGC plans to make the round 1 CRC awards. I will now pass this to Jess to demo our new webpage.
All right, thank you so much. I'm going to now demo the new CRC webpage. I'll share my screen right now. All right, does that look all right on your end? Okay, perfect. Okay, so I have the CRC webpage pulled up. It looks a little different from previous versions of our webpage. We wanted to restructure it a bit to make finding application resources and materials easier for applicants. We hope that this new version is easy to navigate, but as always, feel free to contact our team at CRC sgc.ca.gov if you have any questions or having trouble finding something. So just scrolling through here at the top, you will see our vision top left section, including a button that if you click it, will direct you to our CRC program fact sheet. This will give you a very high level introduction to the program. Underneath that, you will find a section titled Resources. Here's where all of the materials for the program will be. So if you keep going down the page, you will see program updates here on the left. This section has links to relevant website announcements and press releases. And then under that one on the right, we have our program timeline, which we will make sure to cover later before we end this video today, because there are some important dates to note. And at the very, very bottom, there's a button on the left that says CRC email. That will allow you to email the team inbox directly at crc@sgc.ca.gov. And then on the right, there's a button called sign up for updates. If you click this, you can sign up for the CRC email list to receive updates about the program, including forthcoming application materials, reminders, and office hours. So if you click it here, it will open up this page here. And you can sign up for our CRC email list. Okay, so going back to the resources section here at the top, if you click on this button, you'll be directed to a separate Community Resilience Center's resources page. On this page, you'll see 3 buckets here across the top titled Program Information, Program Guidelines, and Application Materials. This will be a very important page because it is where you will find all of the materials for the program. So if you are an applicant interested in applying, I would maybe even recommend bookmarking this page for easy access. So on the leftmost bucket, Program Information, there are 2 buttons, Program Fact Sheet, which will take you directly to the fact sheet again. Here is an example. So I just clicked it and it took me to the fact sheet. Go back to the resources page, and then there's a button for the grant type guide. This is a pre-application material that we released to help applicants identify which CRC grant type would be the best fit for them and their community. This guide summarizes award amounts, funding activities, and eligibility requirements. So if you click that here, you will see the CRC grant type guide here at the top, talking about each different grant type, eligible activities, funding and award amounts. Then moving on into that middle bucket, program guidelines, you'll find a button called Round 1 Final Guidelines. If you click on this, you'll be taken to a separate page. On this page, you will see the CRC Round 1 Final Guidelines, as well as the staff report and memo that provides summaries of the changes made to the final guidelines. This is also the page where you can find the first video of this application webinar series when it is posted. You'll find it in this section in the middle, CRC Round 1 Final Guidelines webinar. Lastly, there's a section dedicated to the public comment workshop series on the draft guidelines, where you'll find recordings of the statewide workshop that we hosted in December 2022 in both English and Spanish. So we're going to go back to the resources page. All right, and then the right-hand bucket, application materials, you'll see 2 buttons right now, Round 1 application materials and Round 1 application TA. The first button will take you to a page that you're mainly going to be using during the application period. Here we have the Notice of Funding Availability, CRC Grant Type Guide, and the Intent to Apply survey. If you haven't already filled this brief survey out and are interested in applying for a CRC grant, please do so when you have a moment. The purpose of this 10-minute survey is to help CRC staff determine levels of interest in the available grants, design tailored outreach, gather information CRC staff need to create application materials and resources, plan staffing and report and support, and prepare technical assistance providers to better support applicants. And then further down the page, you'll find an area where the rest of the videos from the application webinar series will be posted, in addition to being posted on the SGC YouTube channel in the CRC Round 1 application webinar series video playlist that Dora mentioned earlier. Each video will provide a brief overview, application process and components, timeline, and where to find materials and resources for each of the 3 grant types. So going back out into the resources page, the second button, Round 1 Application TA. This page shares about the CRC Technical Assistance Program, which provides direct application assistance for potential applicants to the CRC program. There is more information about that here. If you're an implementation grant applicant interested in receiving TA during the application period, you must submit a pre-proposal by June 16th. This includes a request for application technical assistance as well. And you can access that form here, or you can access it through the Notice of Funding Availability. Planning grant and project development grant applicants are encouraged to submit that TA request form here, also by June 16th. And I will note that submissions received past this date will only receive TA if resources remain to support additional applicants. You can access this form here, additionally on the NOFA. And then if you would like to learn more about the pre-proposal or TA, like I mentioned, please visit the NOFA, or you can review it in the Round 1 final guidelines. To review kind of more specifically the components that are required for the thresholds and such. All right, and then we are hoping to include an FAQ resource eventually also in this application materials that will help the team kind of gather some questions that applicants are having during the process that you can submit through the link in our bot in this video description that we mentioned. You can also email our team, crc@sgc.ca.gov. And we'd be happy to add it to this FAQ document that we're hoping to continuously update throughout the application period, so we can hopefully address all of the questions you all have before and during our office hours. So that brings me to underneath our resource kind of buckets at the top, we have our office hour schedule. So throughout July and August, the CRC team will host a total of 10 virtual office hours via Zoom to offer support to applicants during the application window. Please note that there are a total of 4 audience-specific workshops in the series intended for applicants from rural and tribal communities. So please be mindful of this while registering to attend an office hour session. I'll also note that the last 2 office hour sessions of the series are extended each to 2 hours each. This is the week before final applications are due. So we just wanted to make sure that we were offering a little bit more support during this time frame. Prior registration is encouraged, and on the registration forms, which are linked here next to the dates, you can also submit questions to be answered during the Q&A portion when you register. You can also request live translation or interpretation services for any of the office hour sessions on the registration forms. And to ensure availability of these services, we ask that you make this request at least 14 days in advance of the meeting. So all registration links are live, and you are welcome and invited to register for any of these office hour sessions, in addition to just emailing the CRC team with any questions that you may have. Underneath that, we have our program timeline, updated program timeline that Dora was able to review earlier with you all. You'll find that the pre-proposal, like we've been mentioning, is due on June 16th, and that is required for all implementation grant applicants and does include a technical assistance request in that form. Similarly, on June 16th, we do have our TA request form due for planning and project development grant applicants. And again, this is optional but required to request technical assistance. Like mentioned, in July, we'll have our full application materials release in addition to the rest of the videos in this series. In July and August, we'll have our office hours. In September, early September, our final applications for all grant types will be due, and we're hoping for December 2023, SGC can make the round 1 awards for the CRC program. So very exciting stuff. We hope that this new web page is easy to navigate for you all, but of course, feel free to reach out to us if you have any other questions. Thank you so much for watching this first webinar. Please contact with any questions you have. Our email is down in the video description, as well as our webpage, and a link to sign up for the CRC email list that I mentioned to receive updates about the program. Additionally, we really appreciate you for joining us today and would like the opportunity to follow up with you to send you forthcoming application materials and important updates, including some of the ones we shared today. So if you have a moment, please take our brief post-webinar survey linked in the video description. Again, thank you so much for your interest in this exciting new program, and we hope to talk with you all soon.